Again, this is a duplicative program and a waste of the taxpayer dollars. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back. I yield to the gentleman from Alaska.
I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Minnesota. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I seek a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Minnesota will be postponed. Gentlelady from Florida.
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Speaker.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Brown of Florida. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section: the amount made available by this act for Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, state and local law enforcement assistance for emergency federal law enforcement assistance as authorized by Section 609M, the Justice Assistance Act of 1984, 42 U.S.C. 10513, Public Law 98-473 is hereby increased by $20 million.
I ask unanimous consent to consent.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the House. I'm very excited that finally we have an amendment I think that everybody can support, since everyone supports law enforcement. This amendment fully funds the Emergency Federal Law Enforcement Assistance Program in the amount of $20 million. This program was designed to help local government respond to extraordinary law enforcement emergencies after they have exhausted their own budgets. The Emergency Law Enforcement Assistance Program authorized the Attorney General to provide funds, equipment, training, intelligence, and personnel to alleviate the financial impact of unforeseeable emergency law enforcement situations. This program was authorized in 1984, but has not been funded since 1996. Had it been funded, this program would have helped a community in my district. In October of 2007, a 7-year-old girl, Summer Thomason, went missing on her way home from school. The Clay County Sheriff's Office followed garbage trucks and found Summer's body in a Georgia landfill 2 days later. Thanks to this quick thinking, her killer was captured and will never harm another child. Investigations like this one cost a lot of money. Overtime, lab tests, travel costs, and numerous unforeseen expenses can blow even the most prudent budget. Small communities simply lack the resources to pursue investigations on this scale. The sheriff told me he had exhausted his budget for the year on overtime just for this one case. I did what I could to help scrape together grants programs from other sources, but this program would have filled the gap. By the way, the sheriff and almost everyone in Clay County is Republican, but this is not about party. It's about doing what is right. In an era when local government can barely afford the police they have, a major crime can wipe them out and leave the community more vulnerable. The basic purpose of government is to protect the citizen. This amendment will make sure police can do it without worrying about a crisis that will break their budget. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For purposes, the gentleman from Virginia rise.
With the concern, we have a little bit concerned, but we're going to accept the amendment with the idea we can work as we go to conference, but we'll accept the amendment.
Thank you very much.
Go to that side.
For what purposes, the gentleman from Alaska rise.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, in lieu of an amendment, I would like to take this time to engage the subcommittee chairman in a conversation about the importance of our nation's fisheries management commissions.
I yield time to the gentleman from Alaska for the purpose of the call.
We'll work this out. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to express my support for funding our nation's fisheries management commissions and the good work they do to help keep more fish in our waters. NOAA's Interjudicial Fisheries Act JIFA program supports the conservation and management of fish species which occur in both federal and state waters. Funding for this program is used to support conservation and management tasks not currently being undertaken by NOAA or the regional fisheries management councils. Similarly, fisheries commissioners on the Atlantic, Pacific, and Gulf Coast represent an important bottom-up stakeholder approach to managing our nation's many fisheries and often develop innovative programs to enhance American fisheries and resources.
I thank the gentleman. Thank the gentleman from Alaska, and we will work with the other body to ensure that these programs are adequately funded.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These tight budgetary times, hard choices must be made, and we should ensure that we do our utmost to put funds back into productive programs that increase the sustainability of fisheries and benefit the states, the IJFA, and councils and commissions accounts where areas our current programs are producing proven results for fisheries sustainability. And yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Garamendi of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. The amounts otherwise provided by this act are revised by 1. Reducing the amount made available under the heading Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration, Operations and Administration, and the amount provided.
Move to suspend the reading.
Gentleman from California. Is there objection to the dispensing of the reading? The objection is the reading is dispensed with. California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, day after day, or at least week after week, my colleagues and I are here on the floor talking about jobs. It is about jobs and jobs and jobs again. Our agenda, which we call Make It in America, is an agenda that would rebuild the American manufacturing sector, a sector that has lost about 40% of its jobs in the last 25 years, from some just under 20 million to less than just over 11 million Americans are working in manufacturing today. One of the innovative ways of improving manufacturing has been developed. It's called the Manufacturing Extension Program. It's actually modeled after another federal state program that's been in existence for more than 100 years. Anyone that's in agriculture would recognize the Agricultural Extension Program. This is the Manufacturing Extension Program, a program that has actually added another feature to the old and still very successful Agricultural Extension Program, and that is a public-private partnership. In this program, the federal government, through the National Institute of Standards and Technology, runs a program in which funding is provided for local private or nonprofit organizations to become extension program managers. In California, this has been a very, very successful program. Some $447 million in new retained sales have occurred, $128.8 million in new investments, and some 3,769 jobs have been created. Some examples exist throughout California. In Southern California, a manufacturer, a small company that makes high-tech parts for the aircraft industry, has been able to improve their manufacturing techniques and have been able to stay in business, and they now have been very successful in bringing down contracts with the aircraft industry. In the Bay Area, another program actually run out of San Ramon near my district has been very successful. This program called Mannix has been very successful working with companies in the area, Morgan Hill Precision to be precise, a company that again is a machine shop. That company has used the MEP program, the Manufacturer Extension Program, to good success. Now, how do we pay for this? Some $437,000. We take a little bit from some 20 different parts of the Department of Commerce. The result is it's working. We'd like to keep it working at its full level, last year's level. The bill before us actually reduces it by 50%, so we're adding $437,000 back by taking small amounts from some 20 different programs. With that, I yield back my remaining time.
Gentleman yields back. For purpose does the gentleman for junior eyes.
To strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I have no objection. I support the amendment. It's appropriate to reduce the agency's representation funds in this austere fiscal environment. Last year, the House and Senate Conference Committee on the bill reduced every representation account in the bill by 10%. So I think MEP is a great program, and I support the amendment and yield back the balance of the time.
Gentleman yields back. For purposes of the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise.
I rise to strike the requisite number of words.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I have no higher priority in the commerce section of the bill than MEP. I visited with them in their meetings with local manufacturers. I visited with them in Orlando with over 1,000 manufacturers from around the country. I know intimately the work that they're doing. The National Innovative Marketplace, which the gentleman refers to, been very helpful. This is the only program in last year that left the House at a higher number than the Senate and left the Conference Committee at a higher number than the House or the Senate. So you can tell it rose to its highest level of funding at $128 million. This program started under Senator Hollins at $5 million. It's very, very important. But not only would we accept this amendment, and I thank the chairman, but I think you have to look at what we've done in this bill in total in terms of manufacturing, because the chairman has been focused on this. Over $140 million in the National Science Foundation for the Advanced Manufacturing Initiative. We have money in this for the Advanced Manufacturing Technology Consortium. We, with the chairman's leadership, have an onshoring initiative funded at $5 million to help businesses think through their cost-benefit analysis of coming back home. And we actually held a hearing as the last hearing of the subcommittee before we marked up our bill focused on manufacturing. I've said there's nothing more important to the country or to my caucus than this matter. It's not a partisan issue. Manufacturing, making things in America is of importance to our national security, important to our economy. I want to thank you for your leadership, and I also agree with the amendment. I'll yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Anybody? What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the title of the bill or amendment.
Amendment number 26.
So the gentleman specify the amendment?
Amendment number 26.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 26, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Denham of California.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment that I'm offering is intended to fortify the underlying appropriations bill. Under the bill, the National Marine Fisheries Service and this amendment seeks to ensure that funding doesn't have a detrimental impact on my district. This amendment was adopted on the floor by a voice vote last year and added to the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill. Further, it was also supported in H.R. 1837 earlier this year, and you would have supported what this amendment will achieve. The San Joaquin River Restoration Program continues to push forward on an ill-advised path of wasting water out of the ocean under the guise of saving salmon. Every year, the San Joaquin Restoration Program would require the reintroduction of salmon into the San Joaquin River if this ill-advised attempt to introduce the species fails. The problem is that the river is not yet in a condition where the salmon can survive. There's still a number of different problems and projects along the river that need to be completed, from a bypass to several fish screens. Even in one section of the river, the administration hasn't even designated a channel for where the river should flow and will not for another 2 years. Premature introduction of salmon in the river will only lead to their death at a high cost to taxpayers and the local community. This amendment simply prohibits the premature reintroduction of an endangered salmon species into an uninhabitable river. Central Valley salmon runs are struggling to regain healthy numbers. This amendment ensures that bureaucrats don't purposely reduce the number of available salmon in other streams just to plant them in the San Joaquin system and further threaten the endangered species. Agencies already possess the necessary authority to make the right decision and delay the reintroduction of salmon into a river that cannot sustain the life cycle of the salmon, but they continue to bend to the environmental agenda. More time is needed to build the infrastructure required for the San Joaquin River Restoration Program before the river can sustain a salmon run. Finally, even in the National Marine Fisheries Services has doubts about the success of reintroduction. Contained within the final draft of their reintroduction strategies, and the service stated the river would not support full-scale reintroduction of the salmon, and further, the Department of Interior and the Department of Commerce jointly stated that the completion of Phase 1 of the restoration project was needed before reintroduction of salmon can be successful. This is a very, very common sense issue. The river needs several different projects to be completed for the salmon to even survive. So why, year after year, would we take salmon off of other tributaries, move them to somewhere they can't survive at a huge expense to taxpayers? Mr. Speaker, it's a common sense amendment to prevent taxpayer dollars from being wasted on killing an endangered species. I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For purposes of the gentleman from Virginia rise.
Strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I have no objections to the amendment. Accept the amendment. Yield back the balance.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And to be brief, this amendment seeks to intervene or prohibit a court-supervised settlement of an 18-year running litigation having to do with some very delicate issues that he has, I think, articulated around an endangered species of salmon. To do this at this hour tonight on this bill, I think, is not prudent. I'm opposed to it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
For more than 20 years, the question of what to do with the San Joaquin River, a river that was essentially dried out, and a river in which the indigenous species, salmon and other fish, were simply non-existent. That fight went on and on and on, and after 20 years of fighting and litigation, a settlement was reached. A settlement that called for the restoration of stream flows in the San Joaquin River so that the salmon and other species in that river could be returned. This amendment simply overturns that. It was a federal court order that approved the settlement, a settlement between the water users, the Kern County, the water users of the CVPIA, and also the environmental groups. To do this amendment is simply going to once again reignite a major water war that is totally unnecessary. Certainly it is going to be difficult to restore the river, but it can be done, and it is going to take time, it is going to take money, and we should do it. This is one of the two largest rivers in the state of California. It's a river that had, in the past, before the reservoirs were built and before the river was dried up, an extraordinary run of salmon. It will never be able to return to what it once was, but it can return to a viable river. To take action at this hour of the night in an amendment that is going to only be heard between half a dozen of us here on the floor seems to me to be quite wrong. We ought to oppose this amendment. We ought not allow it to be in the bill, and we ought to allow things to go forward. I would remind those who are supporting this that this is going to be a major blow-up in the U.S. Senate. I know we don't much care about that, but nonetheless, Senator Feinstein has authored legislation to implement this particular settlement. This unravels all of that. Now, we ought not be moving forward, and I therefore oppose the amendment. And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. For purposes, gentleman from Alaska rise.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is
And I
recognized for
yield
5
to the
minutes.
gentleman from California.
Gentleman from Alaska is going to have to remain standing.
Thank you for yielding. As my friend from California completely understands, we can't reintroduce salmon in an area that it isn't inhabitable by salmon. It's just not only a waste of money, but it's going to kill the endangered species. Why move it from one tributary where they are surviving to one where they can't survive? I mean, don't take my word for it. Take the word of National Marine Fisheries Service or the Department of Interior or the Department of Commerce. Take the opinion of the exchange contractors, Water Authority, the San Luis and Delta Mendota. These are the locals that live there. Why waste the money? He knows the issue. So either he wants to kill the salmon at a huge expense, or he just wants to waste the money on an area. This does nothing to overturn the settlement. All it merely says is, let's follow what was originally intended, wait till 2014, when the projects are complete, give the salmon a fighting chance to survive, and let's not waste a lot of money in the meantime. Let's not confuse the issue. He understands this has passed the House by a voice vote. It has passed the House in a bill. And now, once again, after being debated several times in committee, in the light of day, with many amendments, with many opportunities, with the American public watching, we're going to pass it one more time. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. And the opinion of the chair is the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
The desk, amendment number 27.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Denham of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used by the Executive Office for United States Attorneys, including the offices of United States Attorneys, the United States Marshal Service, or employees of the Department of Justice, to carry out activities located at a newly constructed federal courthouse located on a site between Broadway, Hill, 1st and 2nd Streets in Los Angeles, California.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, a very simple amendment. This simply just prevents the funds from being used to divert vital resources to an unneeded federal courthouse in Los Angeles. I have the distinct privilege of chairing the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management. In this capacity, I have oversight over the federal courts. Last Congress, at the request of this subcommittee, the GAO completed a review of the 33 courthouses constructed between 2000 and 2010. What the GAO found was incredible. GSA has built over 3.5 million square feet of courthouse space that we don't need at a cost of $800 million. As a result, the judiciary abandoned existing courthouses across the country and severely underutilizes every single new courthouse. The GAO identified 3 reasons. First of all, when GSA is not busy taking vacations in Las Vegas, they continue to build bigger courthouses than Congress authorizes.
I would ask the gentleman to specify that he had 2 amendments published, amendment number 27, and a new amendment was offered to the chair. Could the gentleman from California specify in particular what exact amendment he is referring to?
Yeah. It is the new amendment that we're asking to have considered that corrects a technical correction.
That is the amendment that was reported by the clerk. The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, the GAO identified 3 different reasons. GSA continues to build courthouses bigger than what Congress authorizes. Congress authorizes one thing, and then GSA goes out and builds not only something completely different, but much bigger at a much greater expense. Number two is we don't have the judges that were once proposed. And judges, third of all, they don't share courtrooms. These courtrooms get used about 2 hours a day, and we don't have any courtroom sharing across the nation that we could be utilizing these courthouses quite a bit more than what they are today. As a result, we demanded the judiciary conduct a real courtroom sharing study so that a third party could figure out how many judges are needed. And over the last 11 years, the judiciary projected there would be somewhere between 72 and 81 judges in L.A. by 2011. The judiciary declared L.A. the #1 judicial space emergency in the United States and proposed a massive, huge new courthouse. However, today we know the primary justification for an L.A. courthouse was wrong. There are fewer judges in L.A. today than there were in 1997. Today we have 2 buildings with 61 courtrooms and 59 judges. We have 61 courtrooms and only 59 judges, no courtroom sharing, being utilized less than 2 hours a day. In that light, I've asked GSA to stop its plans to spend $400 million on a courthouse in Los Angeles. GSA has told me explicitly that they will continue the project at whatever cost. After building a $400 million courthouse, we will have 85 courtrooms and 59 judges. 85 courtrooms and 59 judges. All of these judges, not only do we not only need less courtrooms, we don't need to build this one that we currently are proposing to build. You could put all of these judges in one courthouse, sell off the other courthouse, and never build the one that's being proposed at $400 million. We've seen this before at least 7 times in other cities where new courthouses were built and the old ones sit vacant today. A burden to the taxpayer and eyesores to the community. Big courthouse in Miami sitting vacant. One being redone in New York, vacant. And yet we want to spend $400 million on something we don't need in Los Angeles. I personally toured the LA courthouse facilities and found there is vacant space currently not being used in both the Roybal building as well as the Spring Street building. GAO ran a centralized sharing model for LA and found that all the judges could fit in the Roybal building alone. This country's in a $15 trillion debt, and GSA continues to waste millions of dollars on projects that no one needs. What we do need is to move everybody into the Roybal building, get rid of the vacant space, and sell off the other courthouse. At a time like this, we should be utilizing the best use of taxpayer dollars. Mr. Speaker, this is why I introduced the Civilian Property Realignment Act, to get this out of the hands of the legislature, to make sure that we're actually selling off properties we don't need. We've sold 82 properties over the last decade, and we have 14,000 that are sitting on the vacant list. We can do a much better job, but it starts right here with the LA courthouse. Before we can sell off the things that we don't need, we ought to stop building the things that we don't need. Sell off the property. We can create jobs by letting the private sector go there and build something to get out of a lot of the lease space that we have in the LA area.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the requisite number of words. As best as I can determine, this prohibits the spending of funds at which no funds would be expended under this fiscal year. So I know the gentleman is quite energized about this, but I think that is better handled in the authorizing committee. He says he has legislation and that hopefully will one day get passed and signed into law to deal with this. If the Congress could manage buildings and deal with their utilization, you know, the Capitol's Visitor Center, I mean, we could go through a whole laundry list of our own. I mean, we spend a lot of time criticizing other agencies. The GSA for conferences, you should look at what we spend. I mean, you could go through it. We could point fingers forever. I'd rather see that we would, rather than curse the darkness, that we light a candle. We're trying to finish an appropriations bill. I'm in opposition of this amendment because it prohibits the use of funds spent on employees in a courthouse that won't have any employees this year. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Who is that?
It is.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I have an amendment at the desk, number 2.
The clerk will report the amendment, or designate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following: limitation on funds for Secalusa Initiative, section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used to carry out Select USA Initiative.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would prohibit funding for President Obama's Select USA Initiative. This is a program that would otherwise receive just over $6 million in this bill. Now, if you've never heard of Select USA, you're not alone. Virtually nobody has heard of it outside of the committee and those who are funding it. Last June, President Obama issued an executive order to establish Select USA. It was called the first ever federal effort to attract, retain, and expand business investment in the United States. It seems to me that whenever a new federal program is touted as the first of its kind, it's usually a pretty good indication that it's completely unnecessary. This is no exception to the rule. A quick read of the vague ways in which Select USA says it serves the firms and economic development organizations certainly proves that. Promoting the benefits of investing in the USA, responding to inquiries about the U.S. business climate, helping investors confused by regulatory processes, offering guidance. These are hardly the responsibilities of the federal government. In reality, it seems that the taxpayers are buying little more than a website, pitching the benefits of U.S. subsidiaries to foreign companies. It includes 10 pages of links to federal subsidized programs like grants.gov, ARPA.e, and the Department of Energy's Loan Guarantee Program. That was a program responsible for Solyndra. Only the federal government could find a way to waste taxpayer dollars promoting the waste of taxpayer dollars. Figuring out what Select USA does is one thing. Deciphering its actual accomplishments is downright impossible. The website includes testimonials from companies like Rolls-Royce, IKEA, of plans to invest and develop in the U.S. These companies already do. This Select USA isn't helping them any more than it's helping anybody else. All the announcements are dated between 2006 and 2010, long before this program was even established. So these companies are touting the benefits of a program that wasn't even established yet. How do they know? Hours of research by our staff uncovered only one investment that's even tied to Select USA, and those claims are very dubious. There's a company that that's called AGS, and the president has touted this and his program as being responsible for luring AGS to the U.S. It's mentioned in cooperation or in conjunction with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and other agencies. And it recently elected to invest more than $20 million in new U.S. manufacturing capabilities. Select USA, described as an Obama-launched program, is said to have facilitated coordination between AGS and local officials. But if you look at AGS, AGS has been in this country for more than 40 years, just under a different name. It was called A.G. Simpson Automotive. It's been in business with General Motors and Ford, as I said, for more than 40 years. Companies has been a manufacturing presence in the U.S. since it opened a Michigan plant in 1991. Another plant was opened in Louisiana in 2003. This hardly sounds like a company that needed Select USA to help it discover the benefits of investing in the U.S. There is simply no record of this investment outside of the administration press release and the Commerce Department blog post, not from AGS, not from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, not even from Select USA, only an administration press release touts the involvement of Select USA. Most telling of all, the 2013 Commerce Department budget justification to Congress, which requested $12 million and 20 additional full-time employees, doesn't even include a word about the AGS investment. So what does Select USA even do? Well, I think the committee isn't even sure what Select USA does, because the report language in this bill asks Select USA to justify what it does and explain what it does, because apparently nobody even knows. Yet we took the request from the administration of $12 million and simply cut it in half and gave them half of what they requested. Why in the world are we doing this? At what point are we going to say we can't afford to throw money away like this? Congress didn't even create this program. It was just the administration who thought it up and now is trying to justify it.
Its time has expired.
I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered from the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye.
Excuse me.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
And hopefully this will be the last time when I have to oppose my good friend on the floor of the House. But let me just try to put this into some perspective. This is an administration that in the last 26 months, 4.25 million new private sector jobs. In 2009, $70 billion in loans to small businesses. An administration that's well on its way to more than doubling the number of exports. We have seen a very significant turnaround from an administration that left in a couple of years ago, walking out the door while we were losing 700,000 jobs a month. And we lost millions of jobs over the last few months of the last administration. So now they have a Commerce Department that says we're willing to build on the efforts to have companies around the world select the United States as a place where they want to set up manufacturing plants. Stretched throughout much of our country now, and the President visited the Rolls-Royce plant in Virginia, but in Alabama you have BMWs being built all throughout. You see companies that see the United States as a place that has a world-class workforce, the kind of transparency, the rule of law, the ability to do transactions and have them protected in a court system that functions, to attract foreign investment here. So what the Commerce Department has done, which is not unlike other administrations, they've taken a group of these activities and they've rebranded them under Select USA because it's catchy. It's got a phrase to it. But these are activities that have been conducted by other administrations, would be conducted by future administrations, because we want businesses to see the United States as a place to locate. Even in states like Arizona, to locate and put people to work and make products. So to come to the floor and say, well, this $6 million is wasted, no, this is a small investment that leads to billions of dollars in salaries, hundreds of millions in tax rateables for our country. We want to be a welcome. We want to be open for business. This is a new day. It's a new administration. They have been creating jobs. And I guess that some want to wish back the old crowd that were losing jobs. But I think we should follow in the right direction here. I disagree with the gentleman. I hope that we vote down this amendment and that we support the activities of our Commerce Department to continue to build this economy. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to my friend, Mr. Flake from Arizona. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I would simply submit that when the committee has to ask in report language, please justify and tell us what you're doing. It's a pretty good indication that we don't know and that the program is frivolous and we're wasting money with it. So right here, Select USA, let me read from the committee report. The committee recommends $6.125 million for Select USA initiative which is $3,425,000 more than the fiscal year 2012 level, and $6,125,000 less than the request. Like I said, simply cut the request in half. The ITA redirected $2.7 million in FY 2012, on and on and on. It says no later than November 30, 2013, the Secretary shall report on the location and type of assistance provided. The state to which firm sought to relocate and why, as well as the number of foreign firms that actually decided to locate in the United States as a result of Select USA process. I would submit that if we didn't know this by now, why in the world are we giving them $6.125 million more? We're running a deficit of $1.3 trillion, and we're frittering away money like this when we don't even know what they're doing. And so I say, I would briefly.
Well, the gentleman
from Georgia controls the time.
The gentleman from Georgia, I thank you, and we'll be together tomorrow morning at the prayer service.
I'm looking forward to that, and I'll be glad to yield.
8 a.m. But let me say this: Georgia has benefited from this effort, and Arizona's benefited, Pennsylvania's benefited. The report language you see is just the work of the committee to ensure oversight for the funds that are now being provided, for a report on those funds and what states benefit, so that when we have some other gentleman on the floor wanting to cut this program years forth from now, that we'll have an opportunity to be able to specify, as I've done, the great work that this program is doing. Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding.
I yield back to Mr. Flake.
Let me simply say that when we don't know what they're doing, and the only justification comes from the administration, that a company called AGS that has already been investing in this country for more than 40 years, that needs no help in deciding or having a matchmaker pair them with U.S. firms. In fact, this company actually received trade, this is a Canadian firm investing in the U.S., they actually received trade adjustment assistance during the downturn when employees were laid off from a Canadian company in the U.S. I would submit that if a company knows how to milk the U.S. taxpayer for that, if a foreign company, they know how to invest here. They know it pretty well. We've advertised it. In fact, what this website of this Select USA does is tell them the benefits they can receive if they're here, often subsidies like this. So I would just submit to Mr. Chairman, we've got to start somewhere, and this ought to be it. I can't stress enough how we've got to start cutting some spending. This is a great place to start. With that, I urge adoption of the amendment and yield back the balance of my time, and thank the gentleman.
Now yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Recorded vote.
Okay. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Seek a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. Does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I have an amendment designated as number 3.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona, page 101, after line 10, insert the following new section, Section 542. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to carry out the functions of the political science program in the Division of Social and Economic Sciences of the Directorate of Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences of the National Science Foundation.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. This amendment would prohibit the National Science Foundation from using taxpayer dollars to fund political science research. To be clear, my amendment does not reduce funding for the NSF. Earlier in consideration of this bill, I offered an amendment that would reduce NSF funding. This amendment was simply oriented toward, or this amendment is simply oriented toward ensuring at the least that the NSF does not waste taxpayer dollars on a meritless program. The nation is closing in on a $16 trillion debt. Deficit more than $1.3 trillion. Nearly 40 cents of every dollar we spent is borrowed. Congress can either continue funding unnecessary programs like someone is printing cash in the basement, or we can face facts that there simply isn't enough money to go around. Now, I stand here today and I'll defend responsible federal spending on matters of federal responsibility. Among other things, Congress ought to ensure funding for a strong national defense, secure border. There are things, however, given the economic realities, that Congress ought to reconsider funding on the back of future generations. Just remember, every dollar we're spending in discretionary spending this year, we are borrowing from our kids and our grandkids. Then there are things, let me simply say, I can think of few finer examples to cut than the National Science Foundation's political science program. According to the NSF website, to date, more than $80 million has been awarded to the program's nearly 200 active projects. 3/4 of these awards, totaling over $46 million, were directed to universities with endowments greater than $1 billion. Again, 3/4 of these awards under this program for political science research, totaling over $46 million, were directed to universities that have endowments greater than $1 billion. Think about it. 3 out of 4 of the grants awarded by the NSF Political Science program go to the wealthiest universities in the country. Would those who would oppose this amendment have believed that Harvard and Yale would have to close their political science departments if federal grants are not available for this program? Of course not. These universities and the field of political science will be just fine. However, my greatest concern is not who received these funds, but how they are spent. Every dollar Congress spends is money we don't have, as I mentioned. So what kind of research is NSF charging to our credit card? $700,000 to develop a new model for international climate change analysis. $600,000 to try to figure out if policymakers actually do what citizens want them to do. Let me say that again. $600,000 here spent trying to figure out if policymakers actually do what citizens want them to do. I think we can answer that question in about 5 minutes when we vote on this amendment, because I can tell you, people out there want us to quit funding projects like this. $301,000 to study gender and political ambition among high school and college students. $200,000 to study a study to determine why political candidates make vague statements. $200,000 to study why political candidates make vague statements. That's what we're paying for here. These studies might satisfy the curiosities of a few academics, but I seriously doubt society will benefit from them. How can we justify this outcome? Now, I hold a graduate degree in political science myself. I agree that such research has its benefits. The work of political scientists advances the knowledge and understanding of citizenship and government, politics, and this shouldn't be minimized. But they shouldn't be subsidized by the National Science Foundation. We can't continue to spend money like this. I urge adoption of the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized.
So hope springs eternal, but here I am again opposing my friend's amendment. Let me say this program has been around for over 30 years. And a lot of political change has swept across the world from the time that this program started. I think that it may appear to be costly, $11 million out of a $7 billion funding for the National Science Foundation, but I think that however expensive an education may be, ignorance will probably cost our country more. It is important that we understand the political dynamics, radicalization of populations around the world, how political parties operate in the former Soviet Union, all of the other issues that are being studied. I can see that you could probably bring a list of studies in front of the Congress from the National Science Foundation and get a laugh on any day. But these studies are important. They're merit-based. They're decided on merit only. The fact that some of the best-funded universities win has to do in part with the fact that they're able to have very good faculty who put together very good research projects. and they provide our country and our society a great deal of intellectual benefit. Now, there's some advantage, I guess, politically to appear to be anti-intellectual, to have some desire to know little or less about what's going on in the world about us. But it is not worthy of a great nation. Now, Singapore has 4.8 million people. They put $7 billion in the National Science Foundation. We put $7 billion, and we spend our time tonight debating whether we want to cut some money, trying to understand how their political system got to the point of understanding that even in a very small country, it was critically important for them to become indispensable in terms of having a thirst for knowledge. I would hope that this House would reject this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. For purpose of the gentleman from Georgia rise.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to my good friend from Arizona, Mr. Flake.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me just say, and I won't take all my time, but there is something to the laugh factor. At some point, we've got to realize here that the country's watching us, and they're looking and seeing if we're funding programs like $600,000 to try to figure out if policymakers actually do what citizens want them to do, $200,000 to study why political candidates make vague statements. We're funding this with taxpayer dollars. The acid test ought to be for all of us, whenever we're spending money here, is this program worth borrowing money from our kids and our grandkids, from some countries that don't like us very much? We're buying our bonds. And this doesn't pass that test. It doesn't even come close. And if we simply say this is a big NSF budget and this is a very small part of it, this program, if we continue to say that, we'll never cut it. And that's the problem here. We aren't. The NSF funding overall is way up from the post-stimulus level. We said at the time that the stimulus was passed that that's just a one-time deal and these rates will come down or these programs will come down. They haven't. We're continuing to fund them. And programs like this, the country just looks around and says, this is laughable. Look at what our policymakers are doing. Again, I would say that we will find out the question, the $600,000 question, as to whether or not policymakers actually do what citizens want them to do by how we vote on this amendment right now. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I request humbly a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this Act may be used to carry out or enforce Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, 42 U.S.C. 1973C.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would simply prohibit any funds in this underlying bill from being used to carry out and enforce Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Under Section 5, 7 states in the South, as well as Arizona and Texas and a number of counties scattered across the country, are required to receive federal pre-clearance to every change they make in election laws. The provision stipulates that only changes to election law in those covered locations which are shown to be non-discriminatory may be pre-cleared. Unfortunately, the burden of proving that a change is non-discriminatory is on the state or locality which wishes to make the change. This standard of practice is known to be highly subjective, with no presumption of innocence. It is also highly unfair, allowing some states to make changes to their election laws while other states wishing to make the same changes are forced to jump through a bunch of hoops. I know firsthand how onerous this law is. My home state of Georgia, as an example, has long struggled with the U.S. Department of Justice over its voter identification laws. And they're not alone. The state of Arizona is currently suing to be freed from Section 5, showing evidence that it made accommodations for Spanish-speaking voters long ago. On the other side of the country, South Carolina is challenging the Department of Justice's decision to overturn its voter identification law. Mr. Chairman, as Americans, we pride ourselves in our electoral system. But the integrity of our elections is called into question when this outdated law bars states from ensuring those who come to the polls to vote are eligible to do so. I should note that I'm not the only one who believes that Section 5 is an antiquated provision. Earlier this very year, the U.S. Supreme Court reaffirmed its concern about what they stated, quote, serious constitutional questions raised by Section 5's intrusion into state sovereignty, unquote. Mr. Chairman, we're supposed to be treated equal under the law. This section of the federal statute treats some states more equal than other states. The states being discriminated against. My home state of Georgia is one of those. It's time for us to go to what the Constitution says we should all be treated equal under the law. It's long past time to put this provision to rest. I urge support of my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong opposition to this. First of all, this is an appropriations bill. We're supposed to be discussing how we appropriate money to the Justice Department, Commerce Department, and State Department. And people are just kind of cavaliering, coming in here and offering all kinds of amendments to make no funds available. That isn't the way you set policy. That isn't the way you have a discussion on an issue like this. This is a very important issue. This is about enforcing the Civil Rights Act, the Voters' Rights Act of 1965. We don't think we had discrimination in this country? Don't you think we still have discrimination in making it difficult for people to access the voting booth? I come from a county, a district, that is under this section. I'm from California. The gentleman spoke about Georgia. There are states, like even California, that have counties that qualified to be under this act because they had so low percentage of adults registered to vote. Obviously, these counties were making it very difficult. And what this says that in those counties, when you draw political districts, you've got to have them reviewed by the Justice Department. What's wrong with that? They have a history of discrimination. To come into an appropriations bill and take a big whack out of it in the Voting Rights Act in an election year, what message are we sending? That these states that want to make it very difficult for people to vote are showing how democracy ought to be practiced around the world? No. No. I think these and a lot of other amendments warrant some serious debate in Congress, but certainly not on this bill, not at this time, 10 o'clock at night, on an election year, on a Voting Rights Act bill that deals with the basic fundamental rights of individuals being able to have access to the ballot? No, sir. This amendment is inappropriate at this time and ought to be voted down. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to yield to my colleague from Georgia.
I thank my friend. I'd like to remind my good friend from California that Georgia's voter identification law has been upheld by the courts. And the provision of voter identification is simply to ensure integrity at the polls, that people who are voting are the people who are supposed to be voting. We all have heard and joke about the saying in Chicago about vote early and vote often. And the only way we can ensure the integrity of the vote, the only way we can ensure that people who are voting are those that are supposed to be voting, is by having some identification. And that's simply what this is all about. It's not to prohibit people from coming to the polls. It's not to prohibit or to discriminate against anybody. Who's being discriminated against here are the states, those jurisdictions that are falling under Section 5. We should all be treated equal under the law. I don't believe in discrimination for or against anybody. We have a history of discrimination in my state, throughout the country. We still have discrimination. And I find discrimination deplorable. And I reject it in any manner. But we should be all treated equal under the law. We need to make sure that we have integrity at the polls. We make sure that the people who are voting are truly the people who say they are. I know in some jurisdiction, a person just walks in the poll and say, "I'm Joe Smith," and they say, "Oh, fine, I see you here on the polls, go vote." We can't have this in this country. It's not right, it's not fair, and the people who, Joe Smith or whoever is elected in that election, needs to have absolutely assurance that the person that they voted for won it fair and square, that elections are not stolen, that elections are fair, that whoever comes out at the top of the ballot is the one who really won. So this is not about discrimination. It's not preventing anyone from voting. It's simply just to make sure we have integrity and the people across this country can be sure that their vote counts and be sure that somebody else's vote who may be illegal in this country or who may not be qualified to vote for whatever reason, or who may have already voted but wants to vote a second time is not doing so. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia, Chairman Rice?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.